Would you believe me if I told you that every year more than 600,000 people go missing in the United States alone?
What about if I told you that almost 90,000 are never found?
First off, we have Angela Hammond. On April 4th, 1991, Angela Hammond vanished while talking to her boyfriend from a payphone. Her boyfriend, Rob Schaffer, said that Angela told him about a suspicious man circling the neighborhood in a green pickup truck. Now the driver then stopped near the payphone and Angela disappeared. Rob told the police that he quickly jumped into his car and drove to where Angela was, and as he was heading there, the green pickup drove past him. He slammed the car into reverse gear and blew its transmission, and he then helplessly watched as the abductor took his girlfriend away. A ransom note that was sent after the kidnapping said, "Hello, no redacted, we know you, you are no redacted, people like you deserve what you get. We know where your foxy daughter is and she will see us soon. Tell redacted she has our deepest sympathies in our further loss. Goodbye, redacted." Now police believe the suspect had actually been targeting the daughter of a local cop informant and not Angela. Now the informant received the letter on the same night Angela disappeared, and it seems to be an unfortunate case of mistaken identity, but nothing has ever been found about Angela.
Alright, next up we have the disappearance of Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia, said to have been a patron of the infamous Cecil Hotel, known for the 17th mysterious deaths which occurred between the years 1924 and 2015. The Black Dahlia went missing on January 9th of 1947, and she was missing for 6 days total until her body was discovered on January 15th, just 5 miles away from the hotel. At the time of her death, Elizabeth was a waitress and struggling actor, and it had always been her dream to make headlines, but she was finding it pretty hard to get work in Hollywood, and so she had decided to take some much needed time off and visit an acquaintance in Los Angeles. Elizabeth Short did eventually make headlines, of course, and became nicknamed Black Dahlia after her body was found bisected, cut in half at the waist, and posed like a mannequin in a vacant lot in the Lemire Park area. There was no mess at the scene, and due to the clean nature of the cuts, police were led to believe that they had been made by a man with a steady hand with surgical precision. 9 days after the discovery of Short's body, an envelope containing many of her belongings was sent to the Los Angeles Examiner. The police had wanted to test the envelope and its contents for fingerprints, but quickly realized that all of the items had been cleaned with gasoline to remove any such evidence. On March 14th of 1924, a note was found in a pile of men's clothing confessing to the crime, but the man was never located, and the legitimacy of the confession was never proven. The case of the Black Dahlia has remained unsolved for the last 100 years.
Next up is the Fort Worth missing trio. Rachel Trickla went down to do some Christmas shopping on the morning of December 23rd, 1974 with her friend Lisa Renee Wilson and Julie Mosley. The girls were supposed to be home by 4 p.m, but they were never seen again. Rachel's car was then found parked outside of Sears, and witnesses said they saw the girls inside the shopping center. Locked inside the car were all the gifts the girls had bought, which made it unlikely that they ran away. Later, a letter was sent to Rachel's husband that read, "I know I'm going to catch it, but we just had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car is in Sears upper lot. Love, Rachel." Now besides the other errors in the letter, it looked as if Rachel had misspelt her own name on the first pass, and one of the numbers in the postmark was backwards. Now despite receiving the letter, the girls' families did not believe that it was written by Rachel, nor that the girls had run away. Now despite their efforts, no further information about the girls has ever been found.
Next up we have the mysterious disappearance of D.B. Cooper. On Wednesday, November 25th of 1971, a man going by the name of Daniel Cooper bought himself a one-way ticket from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington, and boarded the plane dressed in business attire, holding a briefcase and a brown paper bag. He sat down and prior to takeoff called the flight attendant over to order a drink. After the plane became airborne, he called that very same flight attendant back to his seat and handed her a note. She put it in her pocket, but Daniel urged her to read it, saying, "Miss, you better look at the note. I have an explosive device." He then instructed the woman to sit down next to him and opened his briefcase, revealing red sticks covered in a mass of wires, and asked her to deliver a message to the pilot. Daniel wanted $200,000 in $20 bills, 2 back parachutes, 2 front parachutes, and a fuel truck delivered to him by the time they landed. When the flight reached Seattle, Daniel held all passengers hostage until his demands were met. With certain members of the crew still on board, he demanded workers to refuel the plane and set a course for Mexico City. At around 8 p.m., during Daniel's second flight of the day, he leaped from the plane with 2 parachutes and a bag full of money. Despite the FBI's efforts and over 45 years of searching, Daniel's whereabouts whereabouts remains unknown, and his case remains one of the greatest cold cases in FBI history.
Then we have Tara Calcio. On the morning of September 20th, 1988, Tara Calcio went out for a bike ride in Belen, New Mexico, and planned to meet her boyfriend for a tennis date at noon. When her mother didn't hear from her by the afternoon, she went looking for her daughter and started to worry when she found the tape Tara had been listening to in a ditch by the side of the highway. The police then found bits of Tara's Walkman and a bike at a campground 20 miles away from her home. Witnesses said they saw Tara on her bike and a truck suspiciously following her. That next summer, across the country in Port St. Joe, Florida, a woman who had been shopping found a Polaroid picture on the ground in the grocery store parking lot. In the picture were a teenage girl and a young boy tied up with tape over their mouths on top of a mattress in what appeared to be in the back of a van. Tara's mother was convinced that this girl was Tara due to the resemblance and the presence of a scar on the leg of the girl in the picture, similar to the one Tara also had. Now, there has never been any conclusive link between Tara and the picture, nor has the boy ever been identified. Tara has never been found, and there's no lead for what happened to her.
Next, we have the incredibly strange disappearance of a group of hikers who went missing in Dyatlov Pass while hiking in the mountains of current-day Russia. The incident took place in February of 1959 after 9 hikers disappeared in the mountains and later turned up dead on February 26 of the same year. After the group failed to return from their hike, authorities went out to canvass the area, and what they found was anything but ordinary and incredibly mysterious. The first strange discovery made was the hikers' abandoned tent, which appeared to have been ripped open from the inside. Footprints, sock prints, and shoe prints near the tent led the team to their next discovery. At the edge of the woods, the bodies of 2 men were discovered wearing nothing but their underwear. At first it appeared the men had died from hypothermia, but upon closer examination of the bodies, along with the bodies of the 7 other men found during the months that followed, that theory was quickly disproved. One of the 9 bodies showed signs of blunt force trauma, another had 3rd-degree burns, one had thrown up vital fluids, and another was missing a tongue. Along with all of this, when tested, many of the men's clothing was found to be radioactive. While authorities have absolutely no idea what really happened in those mountains during 1959, there are theories. Perhaps the most perplexing would be a scientific phenomenon known as infrasound, in which winds interact with the land, causing a barely audible hum that vibrates at a frequency that causes feelings of nausea, panic, dread, chills, nervousness, and raised heart rate, and breathing difficulties. What do you guys think happened?
Moving on to Lars Mittank. Now, this is just a strange case. In July 2014, Lars Mittank was on summer break in Bulgaria. Partying on the beach, he got into a fist fight and sustained a ruptured eardrum. He was advised by his doctor to not fly until it healed, so he told his friends to go back to Germany without him. After spending the night in the hostel alone though, he became extremely scared and paranoid. His mother received a panic text from him stating that he didn't feel safe, she should cancel his credit card, and that 4 mysterious men were following him. Now, the next day he went to the airport and was seen on surveillance walking through the airport with his luggage. Suddenly, he then walks off screen and is then seen sprinting the other direction out of the airport without his bags, jumping over the fence and disappearing into the forest. Now, he was never seen again. His family confirmed that he didn't suffer from any mental illness, and they have no idea why he would begin acting in such a bizarre and erratic manner. A massive search was launched to find Lars, but it was unsuccessful. So what happened to him? I guess we'll never know.
Next, we have the disappearance of Tom Young and Keith Reinhardt. In 1987, Tom Young was renting a retail space in Silver Plume, Colorado. One day, he went for a walk with his dog Gus and never returned. The retail space was later rented to Keith Reinhardt, who became encapsulated with the story of Young. So much so, in fact, that he began writing a novel in which the main character was a combination of himself and the missing man. Eventually, in 1988, Tom Young's body was found with a weapon by local hunters who had been patrolling the mountains nearby. Both Young and his dog had head injuries caused by a handheld weapon. Originally, it was speculated that Young had taken his own life, as it was revealed that the weapon next to him was one that he had purchased only a few days prior to his disappearance. But reports showed that the projectiles used did not match ones compatible with Young's weapon. Locals also maintained that Young loved his dog, and even if he had intended to end his own life, he would have never done anything to harm Gus. Upon hearing this news, Keith decided to go out and explore the area in which Young had been found, and he left for the mountains around 4:30 p.m. He was never seen again. Despite multiple search and investigation efforts, neither Reinhardt's body nor Young's killer were ever found. Was it a coincidence, or was there perhaps something far more sinister taking place in the mountains of Colorado.
Now we have Susan Powell. Susan Powell was last seen on December 6, 2009. At first, relatives reported the entire Powell family missing on December 7th, as Susan did not show up to work that day, and her purse, wallet, and identification were all found inside the house. Now later that day, her husband Joshua returned home with her 2 sons. He claimed he had left Susan sleeping at home shortly after midnight on December 7th and had taken his boys on a camping trip, which, let me just say, doesn't really make any sense. Now, upon searching the Powell residence on December 9th, investigators found traces of Susan's blood on the floor, and at the bank in which she worked, inside a safe deposit box that belonged to her, investigators discovered a handwritten will and testament. In the will, Susan had written about how bad her marriage became, and that Joshua had taken out a $1 million life insurance policy on her. If I die, her note said, it may not be an accident. Now, at the time of her disappearance, Susan's close friends said her marriage had been rocky for years, and that she had even seen a divorce lawyer. Now, Joshua was a suspect but was never charged with anything, and then in February 2012, Josh ended his own life along with his 2 sons in a house explosion during a supervised visit. Now, since then, Susan's case has run cold.
And finally, we have James Thetford, who disappeared in Bennington, Vermont in 1949 after a string of disappearances, including that of James's wife, who went to the market and never returned, took place in the area during the 1940s and 50s, leaving many natives to believe the area, dubbed the Vermont Triangle, to be cursed. Also among the missing was Maddie Rivers, an experienced hiking guide who disappeared in 1945 while leading a group of hunters into the mountain. Later, in 1946, a college student disappeared walking along the Long Trail. In 1950, the city saw the disappearance of young man Paul Jepson, and not long after, Frida Langer vanished in the mountains. While Frida's body was discovered a year later, the cause of death was never determined. The disappearance of James was no less perplexing than the rest, as on the day of his disappearance, James boarded a bus to Bennington with 14 other passengers who all remember seeing the man asleep in his seat. However, when the bus arrived at Bennington, after having made no stops along the way, James Thetford's luggage was still on board, but James himself was nowhere to be found.
We're going to start off the list with a disturbing and mysterious online game called Sad Satan. So Sad Satan is this creepy game that popped up on the internet in 2015. Now, I haven't played it myself, but I've seen videos of people playing it, and having heard the story behind it, it's definitely one of the creepiest games on the internet. I describe it as haunted. It's all in black and white. You maneuver your character through these strange environments, and these incredibly disturbing images will intermittently flash on the screen, some of which people say are real images of dead bodies and worse things, if you can imagine that. People who played it felt seriously disturbed by what they saw and heard, but even stranger, nobody knew where the game came from or who made it. At least not the person's real identity, anyway. It's said to have been created by someone on the dark web, going by the name of ZK. One version of the game ended up on a YouTube channel called Obscure Horror Corner, but even then folks weren't sure if it was the real game or some made-up version for views. Till this day, nobody's really cracked the mystery of who's behind Sad Satan.
Next up, we have the mystery of the Jack Froese emails. In June of 2011, Jack Froese died unexpectedly of a heart attack at the age of 32. His friends and family were shocked, but even more so after they began receiving emails that appeared to be coming from Jack himself 5 months after his death. In particular, Jack's friend Tim Hart received many emails that appeared to be written by Jack. How so? They came from Jack's personal email account and included personal details about the two men's relationship. The first email Tim received simply said, "I'm watching," but then the next email read, "Do you hear me? I'm at your house, clean your effing attic." It was the mention of the attic that really made it clear that whoever or whatever was doing this had to have been listening to one of the final conversations Tim had had with Jack, the second to last time Jack had visited Tim's home before his death. The two had gone up to hang out in Tim's attic, as they often did, and they joked about how dirty it was, and Froese even said that he would clean it himself. Curious, Tim replied to the email, but there was no response. In another instance, Jack sent an email to his cousin, Jimmy McCraw, saying, "Hey Jim, how you doing? I knew you would break your ankle. Tried to warn you." Unlike the attic comment that took place during Jack's life and was kind of like an inside joke that only those two would know about, Jimmy broke his ankle long after his cousin's death. So how did he know know that how did the email get to these men from Jack's account, including these kind of personal informations? I don't know, you guys. Do you have any theories?
Next we have the most mysterious song on the internet. So this is a song I was listening to actually a lot last summer when I first found out about this story. It's pretty catchy, you know, like the wind, you can't hear us. Nobody knows who this song is by. So this is a track that was recorded from a German radio station in the early 80s. The song was taped by a young man going by the name of Darius S. off the northern German radio station NDR. He recorded it onto a cassette tape along with other songs by bands like The Cure and Ecstasy. Years later, he pulled out the tape and noticed there was one song he didn't recognize. So he did what anyone does nowadays. He took it to the internet. Surely someone would know where this song came from, but nobody had any idea what this song was. It's become a total cult internet mystery. There have been people who have tried to claim the song belongs to them. One guy posted in a YouTube comment that it was from his band Numb 212. It's never been confirmed, and I honestly don't buy it. Numb 212, that's not the kind of name an 80s new wave band would have had, and there's never been any solid proof that the song belongs to him. All we know is that the singer seems to have a vaguely European accent, possibly German, and we can pick out some of the lyrics. Again, great song.
Next on our list today we have Grave Robbing for Morons, a video that appeared on the internet out of nowhere and doesn't really make a lot of sense. The video was shot on VHS and it shows a man, presumably in his early 20s, sitting in a basement wearing a leather jacket and holding a skull while being surrounded by human bones, while explaining how to rob a grave. And while some of the advice given by the young man appears to be contradictory and inaccurate, the majority of the explanation surprisingly makes a good amount of sense. As much as it can, I guess. The whole concept is ridiculous. However, many bone experts, whatever that means, who have seen the video online said that the bones showed by the young man looked to be incredibly authentic, and they even identified the skull in the man's hand, which he claims to have acquired during his second grave robbing, belonging to a female, age unknown. No one knows where the video came from, which many people believe was filmed in 1987. But again, no one knows who filmed it, where it was filmed, why it was filmed, and at this point in time I'm not really sure if we'll ever get any answers, but feel free to go ahead and leave me your best guess, as always, in the comments.
This next one is pretty cool. Cicada 3301. It's a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside of another mystery on the internet. So it all began back in January of 2012 when this weird puzzle popped up out of nowhere. It was a challenge posted to several online forums across different websites reading, "Hello, we are looking for highly intelligent individuals. To find them, we devised a test. There is a message hidden in this message. Find it and it will lead you on the road to finding us. We look forward to meeting the few that will make it all the way through. Good luck, 3301. So some brainy users started deciphering this message that then led to more and more crazy complex puzzles. People who took up the challenge found themselves digging into cryptography, steganography, literature, who knows what else. I wish I was smart so I could have uncovered the puzzle and started down like this adventure. Because some folks claimed they had to go on real world like treasure hunts to crack these puzzles. Like they'd get clues leading them to physical locations around the globe. Like very exciting. Of course, nobody knows who's behind Cicada 3301 or what they're up to. Some think it's maybe some kind of recruitment test for like a super secret organization, maybe the CIA or something. Others think that maybe there's something more nefarious and dark going on, but you know, who knows? And we don't even know if anyone completed the entire thing.
Okay guys, go ahead and tell James that he's smart in the comments, come on. Next up we have the mystery of Chip Chan, who is a South Korean woman who first appeared online as a YouTube live streamer and who often slept on said live stream for upwards of 20 hours at a time, and she only ever left her house in disguise. People became fascinated by her strange day-to-day behaviors, and eventually the live streaming evolved into blogging. And that's when things began to get even weirder, and quite quite dark too. Chip Chan claimed that the South Korean police had been mistreating her, and one specific police officer, who she referred to only as Pig or P, had been specifically targeting her and making her life an unbearable living hell. Chip Chan claims that whenever she left her house, the officer would make her unconscious and drag her to an unknown location before implanting a chip into her ankle that she believed to be a mind control device. In another blog post, she shared a picture of her neck covered in bug bites. I mean, like, covered. It was pretty gross. And she claimed that the officer, P, had used mind control on the bugs to make them attack her. About 4 years ago, her streams ended, and she made a blog post saying that it was because P had shut her down, but then eventually the blog stopped too. While there are many theories going around regarding the truth about what really happened to Chip Chan, many people believe that she was in fact a paranoid schizophrenic who had refused help. Perhaps she stopped posting after being admitted to a mental hospital, or do you guys think what she was saying is true and maybe the police finally got to her?
Alright, next up we have a mysterious Russian radio station that's been sending out strange signals since the 70s, and people all over the internet have been trying to figure out what the deal is with it for years. The station broadcasts this monotonous buzzing noise interrupted by weird cryptic messages in Russian. Take a listen here. So people have been trying to decode this radio station for years, but they're often just random strings of numbers or disjointed words or names, like you just heard. Other than like the intermittent voices cutting into the buzzing, there was also a transmission in 2010 where there was a brief excerpt from Swan Lake, and on the 11th of November of that same year, intermittent phone conversations were transmitted and recorded by a listener. Again, most anyone has been able to like piece together are just random phrases and words. Some think they're coded messages for spies or secret military communications. Until this day though, nobody knows who's behind UVB 76 or why it exists.
Raise your hand if you are the founder of Bitcoin. Now, if you raised your hand, you are either a liar or one of the most mysterious internet icons on Earth. When the cryptocurrency launched back on January 3rd of 2009, it quickly became, I think, the most successful and prominent cryptocurrency known to man. I mean, in 2021, it reached a market value of over $1 trillion US dollars. Do you know what I could do with that amount of money? I could buy a lot of stuff. So, while Bitcoin launched in 2009, it was actually mentioned online a year prior in a paper titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. The paper appeared to be written by someone or something called Satoshi Nakamoto, but no one knows who that is, or who they are, or what they are. It could be one person, a small group, a whole team, or even some kind of like AI generated thing. No one knows. What we do know, however, is that in 2011, Satoshi Nakamoto disappeared after emailing a Bitcoin core developer saying that he had, quote, moved on to better things. Many people have speculated that Australian scientist Craig Wright or BitGold founder Nick Szabo might have been the man or men behind the whole thing, but the truth is, unless you are Satoshi Nakamoto, there's just no way to know though.
Alright, next up we have the mystery of 112 Dirtbag. Mara Murray was a 21-year-old college student who vanished without a trace in February of 2004 after crashing her car on a rural road in Haverhill, New Hampshire. She was last seen by witnesses after the accident, but when police arrived on the scene just minutes later, she was gone. Now enter 112 Dirtbag. So Mara's father in an interview dubbed whoever was responsible for his daughter's perceived kidnapping as a, quote, dirtbag. On the 8th anniversary of her vanishing, a chilling YouTube video surfaced on a channel named 112 Dirtbag. In the video, a middle-aged man stares into the camera with this unsettling seriousness before breaking into this maniacal laughter. Then he winks at the camera before the screen goes black and the message, "Happy Anniversary," appears on screen. Not only could the dirtbag part be a reference to the comment Mara's father made, but she'd also gone missing on Route 112. Police were able to trace the man's identity in the video, but there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime. The question still remains though, was this guy just a troll, exploiting the tragedy for attention, or could he actually have been involved in Mara's disappearance?
And finally we have GhostNet, an electronic espionage operation that came to light in in 2009 that had infiltrated 1,295 computers across 103 countries. The operation had been used to spy on individuals as well as organizations and governments, and it went on for 2 years before it was discovered after an investigation had been launched into a potential breach in the office of the Dalai Lama in India. It was investigators from the University of Toronto, shout out my Canadians, who confirmed the cyber spy attack, and they were also able to trace its origins back to China. It was noted that while the exact source of the espionage was unknown, the acting attackers were likely civilians who had run the operation for either profit or patriotic reasons. Or it was the government acting as private citizens in order to spy on other countries while maintaining plausible deniability for their actions? Who knows, right? I mean, do you know? Because like, if you know, let me know, you know?
Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 was a Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation aircraft that seemed to vanish on March 16th of 1962. The flight left from California was en route to its final destination in Saigon. The plane was carrying 96 military passengers, but at some point during the flight it lost contact and disappeared from radar screens somewhere over the western Pacific Ocean. There was no wreckage or debris ever found. One possibility is that the plane exploded in midair, but without any remnants of the plane to look at, it's not clear exactly what would have caused that to happen. There's also the possibility that the aircraft deviated from its flight path because of some navigational error and then crashed in an area not covered in the search. There were also no distress calls to go off of, so to this day, the cause of the disappearance is still unknown. Next up on the list is Varig Flight 967. Varig Flight 967 was a commercial flight that mysteriously disappeared on January 30th of 1979 while en route from Tokyo to Rio de Janeiro. The plane was a Boeing 707-323C operated by the Brazilian airline Varig. It was mostly carrying cargo, $1.24 million worth of paintings by the Japanese-Brazilian painter Manobu Mabe. The flight had a scheduled layover in Los Angeles where it was going to pick up additional cargo and passengers, but it never landed in LA. There was a sudden loss of communication with air traffic control. Around 8 hours into the flight, the crew failed to establish radio contact during routine check-ins. No distress signals or emergency calls were ever received either. The aircraft just went silent. Finding this plane was like searching for a needle in a haystack. It went down somewhere in the vast Pacific Ocean. Search operations were carried out by both Brazilian and American authorities, but the wreckage of the flight was never found, and no signs of the cargo or 6 crew members ever been found either. Canadian Pacific Airlines Flight 3505. On July 21st of 1951, during a scheduled flight from Vancouver, Canada to Tokyo, the plane disappeared without a trace. The flight was carrying 31 passengers and 6 crew members. It left Vancouver International Airport at 6:35 with a planned stopover at Anchorage Airport in Alaska. The aircraft was on schedule, reporting its position at the Cape Spencer intersection in British Columbia, 90 minutes away from Anchorage, but the weather conditions in the area were apparently challenging. Heavy rain and icing, and visibility was low. Fortunately, after the last reported position, the plane went silent. The search efforts were eventually called off on October 31st of 1951. 6-member crew were all Canadians, while the 31 passengers included 2 Royal Canadian Navy sailors, 26 United States military members, and 3 civilian US citizens. But unfortunately, none of these passengers have ever been found. Next up, we have the Indian Air Force AN-32. In January of 2016, an Antonov AN-32 aircraft of the Indian Air Force had gone missing during a flight from Chennai to Port Blair in the Bay of Bengal. The flight, carrying 29 people on board, including 6 crew and 23 passengers, lost contact with air traffic control about 16 minutes after taking off. And of course, the plane never reached its destination. There was a widespread search and rescue operation operation. And after months of relentless efforts by Indian authorities with naval vessels, aircrafts, and satellite imagery to scour the Bay of Bengal, nothing turned up. The search covered extensive areas too, both on the surface of the water and beneath it. For a long time it was assumed the wreckage would never be found. Just another mysterious plane disappearance. But just recently, in January of this year, which at the time of recording this is 2024, the wreckage of the aircraft was finally discovered off the coast of Chennai. Fortunately, there were no survivors, unsurprisingly. Next on the list we have Glenn Miller. So this is a famous big band leader who went missing on a flight during World War II. So Glenn Miller was a renowned American band leader, composer, and trombonist during the swing era of the 30s and 40s. But Miller had joined in the war effort, and on December 15th of 1944, Miller boarded a small UC-64 Norseman aircraft in England en route to France for a series of performances to entertain troops that were stationed there. But Miller's plane never reached its destination. Somewhere over the English Channel, the aircraft disappeared without a trace. The plane and remains of the passengers were never found. One theory is that the plane actually was shot down after receiving friendly fire from English planes, and this was then covered up. In the chaos at the time, it's very possible that Miller's plane might have been mistaken for an enemy craft. But there could have also just been mechanical failure or some other accident and the plane just went down, never to be found. Next up is the BSAA Stardust. On August 2nd of 1947, tragedy struck as the British South American Airways Lancastrian, known as Stardust, was on its way from Buenos Aires to Santiago, Chile. The aircraft crashed into Mount Tupungato in the Argentine Andes. The wreckage wasn't found for years, and it wasn't until the late 90s that fragments of the missing aircraft started to emerge from glacial ice. And then from the parts of the wreckage, researchers were able to figure out the crew must have become disoriented about their exact location, and mistakenly thinking they'd already cleared the mountaintops, they started their descent, not realizing they were still behind cloud-covered peaks. So then they crashed into the mountain. Everyone on board would have died, and the aircraft was buried beneath snow and ice. One of the mysteries about this case for a long time is the final Morse code transmission from Stardust to Santiago Airport. The last word, Stendek, was received 4 minutes before the scheduled landing, and it was repeated twice. The message most likely translates to severe turbulence encountered, now descending, emergency crash landing. And that's not the only plane that had an unfortunate run-in with the Andes Mountains. The Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 incident, one of the most insane tales involving a plane in history. So in 1972, an aircraft carrying 45 passengers, including members of the Uruguayan rugby team, their friends and family, left from Uruguay to Santiago, Chile. As the aircraft approached the Andes, the plane crashed into the mountains. The impact instantly claimed the lives of several of the passengers, but there were survivors who now found themselves stranded. There was extreme cold and they had little to no food. They started to realize that there was a good chance they weren't going to be found, at least not anytime soon. And so in order to survive, some resorted to eating people who had already died, pretty grim, but two survivors made the decision to venture out in search of help. They traveled on foot for days until they finally encountered 3 men on horseback who were able to communicate with them for help. Finally, the remaining survivors were rescued on December 23rd, 1972. Next up on the list we have Flight 19, probably the most famous Bermuda Triangle tale. So on December 5th of 1945, there was a group of 5 US Navy Avenger torpedo bombers on a routine training mission. They took off from the Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale in Florida for what they called Navigation Problem 1, basically a navigation exercise. Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, a seasoned pilot, was leading the exercise. The plan was to fly east, turn north, and then head west back to the base. Not too far into the exercise though, Taylor radioed in, saying his compass was acting up. He was convinced they were off course, so Flight 19 started going in different directions, trying to figure out where they were. Their fuel started running low, and Taylor told the pilots to ditch their planes in the ocean because They couldn't find land. The last radio call comes in around 6:20 p.m. saying they're getting ready to bail out, and then silence. No distress signals, no emergency calls, just nothing. Flight 19 vanished into thin air, seemingly. And what's even crazier is that one of the search and rescue crafts, a flying boat, was then sent out to find the missing pilots, and that also disappeared. All 13 crew members were never seen or heard from again. And of course, no bits of Flight 19 or its crew have ever turned up. Just one of the many reasons the Bermuda Triangle is such an unsettling part of the world. Next, we have the infamous D.B. Cooper case. Gotta be one of the most stylish plane jackings of all time. So it's Thanksgiving Eve, and a regular dude, seemingly, who we'll later know as D.B. Cooper, hops on a Northwest Orient Airlines flight in Portland, Oregon. He's got a one-way ticket to Seattle. Cooper's dressed like a typical businessman, a suit, he's got a briefcase, and in that briefcase were explosives. He hands a note to a flight attendant claiming he's got explosives and wants $200,000 and some parachutes. He ends up getting the cash and parachutes he asked for. It takes a few hours of haggling, but eventually Cooper releases the 36 passengers in exchange for the ransom and the parachutes. Cooper instructs the remaining flight crew to head towards Mexico City at a low altitude, keeping the plane slow and with its landing gear down. The plan is to make a quiet escape. Somewhere over the rugged terrains of Washington State, in the middle of a storm, Cooper opens a rear stairway door and takes a leap into the pitch black darkness with his parachute and the ransom money. And that's the last anyone sees of him. The plane lands in Reno, and when they check, D.B. Cooper's no longer on board. It's still not known whether he actually survived the jump or not. He may have drowned, had an accident with his parachute, or he may have actually survived and gotten away with the whole thing. Still don't know for sure. And finally, we of course have Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. You knew this one was coming up. So on March 8th of 2014, the Boeing 777 carrying 239 passengers and crew seemingly vanished without a trace during its journey from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. Just less than an hour after the takeoff, the aircraft disappeared from radar screens, leaving no distress signals or communication indicating that there were any issues. At first, the search for Flight 370 focused on the Gulf of Thailand and the South China Sea, where the last contact with air traffic control was made, but then it came out that the plane had made an abrupt turn, changing direction from its planned route, and flew for several hours before satellite data showed it likely went down in the southern Indian Ocean. All 227 passengers and 12 crew were presumed dead, and the incident became the deadliest involving a Boeing 777 and the deadliest in Malaysia Airlines history. That is until Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot down over Ukraine just a few months later. Really bad year for Malaysia Airlines. The search for MH370 became the most expensive in aviation history. Several pieces of debris confirmed to be from the plane washed ashore in the western Indian Ocean in 2015 and 16, and there was a 3-year search covering 120,000 square kilometers of ocean. But the Joint Agency Coordination Center suspended its activities in January 2017 without having located the aircraft. There was also a second search in January of 2018 by private contractor Ocean Infinity, but they also came up empty-handed after 6 months. It's June of 1992, and two friends, Stacy McCall and Susie Streeter, have just graduated high school. They go to their graduation party and leave at around 2:15 a.m. Their plan is to spend the night at another friend's place, Jane Kirby, and then go to a water park the next day. But Jane's place was too crowded, so they decided to sleep at Susie's mom's place. The next day, Jane and her boyfriend headed to the water park as planned. They waited around for a bit, but no sign of Susie or Stacy. Eventually, they went over to the house to see what they were up to. They knocked, no answer, knocked again, nothing. They didn't seem to be home, but the door was unlocked and all of their cars were parked outside. A few hours go by and then Stacy's mom, Janice, comes over to investigate. They all entered the home to discover that, yeah, there was nobody home. Even stranger than their cars still being outside, though all of their purses were still home. Even Susie and her mom Cheryl's cigarettes were still there. On top of that, there was no sign of a struggle. It was as if they'd just vanished into thin air. And with no leads, there wasn't much anyone could do but aimlessly search around. Until this day, the case is still a complete mystery. Next on the list is Mr. Cruel. So this case is incredibly creepy. From 1987 to 1990, there were 3 attacks made by a still unknown assailant in Melbourne, Australia. He wore a balaclava, so victims were never able to get a good look at his face. All we have to go off is this unsettling police sketch. The media soon dubbed him Mr. Cruel, and the name really fits. This guy broke into 3 family homes with the entire families present and would torment them. He'd tie the parents up and cut the phone lines before abducting the youngest of the family. You can only imagine the despicable things. This guy did after that. Now, fortunately, his 3 victims would eventually be released, but Mr. Cruel was never found or even identified. Alright, the Tylenol case. This incredibly disturbing case happened in 1992 in Chicago. Someone tampered with Tylenol bottles, lacing them with potassium cyanide. A young girl died, first after taking an extra strength Tylenol, then the next day, 3 members of a single family all died after consuming Tylenol from the same bottle. On top of that, 3 separate people also died that day after taking Tylenol. When it was discovered that the Janices had died as a result of Tylenol, laced with 3 times the fatal amount of cyanide, a press conference was held advising people not to take Tylenol for the time being. Eventually, this led to the product being pulled, like loads of product from the shelves, and it was recalled nationwide eventually. Now we have things like pull stickers on bottles because of incidents just like this. The case really falls into that category of crime I've always found deeply unsettling. Everything on this list is very disturbing, but the idea you could just walk into a drugstore and buy something off the shelf completely unaware that it's been poisoned by some unknown creep with a sick thrill of harming other people completely at random, absolutely nightmarish. Next up, we have the case of Russell and Shirley Dermond. Russell and Shirley were an elderly couple living in Putnam County, Georgia. They lived in a very quiet, safe neighborhood. Nothing bad ever happened there. But sometime between May 1st of 2014, when they were last known to be alive, and May 4th, when they failed to show up to an event they'd planned to attend with their neighbors, the couple met a grisly end. One neighbor, growing concerned, decided to check on them. He knocked on their door and got no answer, but the door was unlocked. He eventually made a horrific discovery. Russell's decapitated body was lying in the garage, but Shirley was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until 10 days later that Shirley's body was found in a lake about 5 miles from the home. She'd suffered blunt force trauma to the head, and sadly the case was a total dead end. There were no witnesses, no evidence of a motive behind the attack, let alone a suspect, so the case remains unsolved to this day. Russell's head hasn't even been found. Next, we have the mysterious death of Robert Wan. So this is a very, very strange case. So on the night of August 2nd of 2006, Wan, who is a lawyer, was staying at the home of 3 friends, Joseph Prince, Victor Zaborski, and Dylan Ward, in Washington, D.C. That night he was supposed to sleep in a guest room, but he was found dead in the room from stab wounds. The 3 housemates called the police, claiming that an unknown intruder must have entered the house, but investigators found little evidence of any forced entry, and even stranger, there were no signs of a struggle, like as if one hadn't tried to defend himself at all. This meant he was likely incapacitated with a paralyzing agent before being stabbed. The other strange part was the lack of blood. There was none. There wasn't even any coming out of his wounds. It was such an oddly clean crime scene. Suspicion fell on Price, Zaborski, and Ward. They were later charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence, as it seemed they were not fully cooperating with the investigation. And during the trial, the defense maintained their innocence, though, arguing that Wan's death was indeed caused by some unknown intruder. In 2010, the 3 housemates were acquitted of the criminal charges. The judge noted that the prosecution had failed to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, That's a pretty infuriating way for the case to end, because obviously these three housemates had something to do with Juan's death. But what was the motive? That's the question. Next is the case of the Setagaya family. On the night of December 30th, 2000, in the Setagaya ward of Tokyo, the Miyazawa family, composed of Mikio Miyazawa, his wife Yasuko Miyazawa, their daughter Nina, and son Rei, died in their own home at the hands of an unknown assailant. The crime was discovered on New Year's Day when a neighbor noticed bloodstains in the window of the Miyazawa residence and contacted the police. Authorities would find the lifeless bodies of the Miyazawa family, and it had been a pretty gruesome scene. All four family members had been bound, beaten, and stabbed to death. And the assailant stuck around for a while after committing the act. He ate some of their food, he cruised the internet for a bit, and left without taking any valuable items. Whoever this person was, they're still out there unless they've died since, and it's frustrating because there was so much evidence at the scene. There was DNA and fingerprints everywhere, but somehow the perpetrator has never been identified. Alright, the Brandon Swanson case. This is yet again a completely baffling case. In southwestern Minnesota in May of 2008, Brandon Swanson, a college student, suddenly went missing. On the night of May 14th, Brandon was driving home from a party. At some point he got lost and then got his car stuck in a ditch. He phoned up his father trying to give him his whereabouts. His parents drove to his whereabouts and tried flashing their headlights, but Brandon said he didn't see them. So he told his dad, you know what, I'm just gonna walk to a nearby town to get some help. He could see lights in the distance that he believed was the nearby town of Lind. Dad then stayed on the phone with him as he walked towards the town. At some point during the call though, Brandon suddenly exclaimed, "Oh sh," and then went silent. They tried to call Brandon again, thinking the call had just disconnected, but they couldn't reach him. He hasn't been seen or heard from since. Next, we have the Florence Salon case. On a cool November morning in 2001 in Florence, Montana, a customer arrived at the hair gallery salon for a scheduled appointment. What they found was the scene of a deadly crime. 3 women were dead, including Dorothy Harris, the owner of the salon, Brenda Patch, a manicurist, and Cynthia Paulus, a customer. Their throats had all been slit. Once again, there was nothing to go off here. No witnesses, no clear motive or suspect, just 3 innocent women whose lives were taken seemingly at complete random. The case of Lori Deppes. Lori Deppes, a 20-year-old woman, disappeared on August 19th of 1992 from Menasha, Wisconsin. On the night of her disappearance, Lori had been working at a local photography studio and was last seen leaving her shift. She had plans to meet her boyfriend at his apartment later that evening, but never arrived. Well, she'd made it into the parking lot, but never physically into the building. People inside the apartment heard her drive up, they heard her car door shut, but that was it. She never came in. Her car was found in the parking lot of the apartment complex. A styrofoam cup of soda was on top of it, but no sign of Lori. And she's never been found. I can't imagine how completely devastating this would be and confusing, just awful. We always think of, you know, if my loved one is, heaven forbid, goes missing, they'll probably be when I'm not around. They'll probably be somewhere off alone. But the fact that she was right there outside the apartment, like car in the parking lot, they heard her getting out of the car and then just poof, gone. Has to be absolutely maddening. Finally though, we have the infamous Yuba County 5 case. This is one of the most mysterious cases in the United States. 5 young men in Yuba County, California disappeared in 1978. Theodore Weir, Jack Hewitt, and Gary Matthias were a group of friends, all with intellectual disabilities of some kind. They disappeared after attending a college basketball game. After the game, the men were last seen at a convenience store. They had plans to return home to Yuba County, but they never made it back. Their abandoned car was later found in a remote and mountainous area called Plumas National Forest. The car was stuck in the snow and there was no sign of the men. It was determined that they'd walked away from the car, even though the weather was very harsh. In June of 1978, there was finally a breakthrough in the case. The remains of Ted were discovered in a trailer about 19 miles from where the car had been found. There was food and supplies in the trailer, where it had seemingly died of starvation and exposure. This was very odd because the trailer was stocked with enough food to keep all 5 men alive for quite a while, and there was stuff there to make fire and everything, but none of that had been used. Then Jack and Bill were found the following day, about 11 miles from the car, and all that was left of Bill were bones, and Jack looked to have been partially eaten by an animal. Jackie's remains were found 2 days later, and as for Gary, he was never found. So what went on here? Why did they leave so far from the car and try and stay in this trailer? Why didn't they eat the food that was there? We'll likely never know. And we're going to kick off the list with the legend of the Hook Man. Now, supposedly on Pond Run Road in the village of New Richmond, there once lived a doctor and his wife. They had a son who was mentally disturbed, and these two were ashamed of him and opted to keep him out of the public eye. This meant chaining him up in the basement whenever people were over, or when they just didn't want him in their presence. One night, there was a terrible storm. A bolt of lightning hit their house and a fire started. When authorities arrived on the scene, they found the parents burnt to death, which was the perfect outcome for despicable people like that. But the boy, who had been chained up in the basement at the time, was nowhere to be found, aside from his hand, still chained up to the wall in the basement. So where did he go? Well, legends started to spread that over the years he grew up stalking through the woods, stealing from homes nearby, brandishing a hook for a hand, and brutalizing innocent people, especially young couples. The urban legend of the Hook Man is one you see all over the place. This is just Ohio's specific version of the tale. If you're liking our channel so far, by the way, if you're new here, why not hit that subscribe button? You got nothing to lose. It's free. We got awesome videos coming at you on the daily. Alright, next on the list we have Munchkinland. This urban legend of Munchkinland, also known as Tiny Town in Cincinnati, Ohio, centers around a peculiar area near Rumpke Landfill. Here, a cluster of small houses and buildings allegedly housed a community of little people. According to local lore, these tiny inhabitants were notorious for hurling rocks at passing cars, attempting to deter any intruders. Numerous tales circulated about unsuspecting individuals who stopped their cars in the vicinity, only to find themselves confronted by enraged little folk armed with rocks and ready to defend their territory. As to where these little people are said to have come from, the legend goes that they were retired circus performers. Now, there actually was a collection of small structures in this area. They've recently been torn down, I believe. But as to why they were there are lots of different stories, including, of course, that they were built by the little retired circus performers. A more likely explanation, though, is that they had been built by a farmer on the land who had decided he wanted to start running hay rides, and that he, built the houses on the property. But I think it's still a bit murky as to how they got there. Number 8, the Peninsula Python. So this incident involved the discovery of a large python in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park in Peninsula, Ohio in the summer of 1944. The question obviously was, how did this python, native to tropical regions, end up in a park in Ohio? Well, for a while, authorities didn't even think the reports were real, or at least they didn't think people were really seeing what they thought they were seeing. A massive snake stalking in the area became something of an urban legend at the time, but turns out that there indeed was a python, and as to how it got there, some believed that it had been a pet released by its owner, others speculated that it had escaped from a traveling circus or a private exotic animal collection. It's still a bit of a mystery to this day as to how it really got there. The python was never even found. It likely died during the winter, but some say it's still stalking its way out there. At number 7, we have Gore Orphanage. Light of Hope Orphanage was established in 1902. It was run by a religious zealot. One day the building caught fire, and the young ones inside all perished in the flames, the cries for help being unheard. The question was, how did the fire start? Well, some say it was an accident, maybe one of the orphans dropped a lamp, but then there's the legend of Old Man Gore, the cruel, sadistic man who ran the facility. In reality, the man's name was Johann Sprunger. He ran the orphanage with his wife, Katerina. It was actually a former orphanage they ran that caught on fire. It was true that they were cruel though. Orphans attempted escaping from the institution on a number of occasions. There was also a fire in an elementary school in the nearby town of Collinwood where 176 young people died. So most likely these two real-life incidents were combined and kind of formed this urban legend that is Gore Orphanage. Next on the list we have the disappearance of Brian Schaefer. In 2006, Brian Schaefer, a medical student at Ohio State University, completely vanished. On the night of March 31st, Schaefer went out with friends to the Ugly Tuna Saloon, a bar near the campus in Columbus. Surveillance footage captured him entering the bar, but never showed him actually leaving. When his friends realized he was missing, they figured he'd gone home, but he hadn't. And surveillance footage from the bar showed footage of Brian speaking with two women outside the bar just before 2 a.m. His friends had already left at this point. Then he went back inside and that was it. No trace of him after that. And here's the thing, the bar only had one entrance, monitored by surveillance cameras, which didn't record Brian leaving. On top of that, there were no signs of foul play in his apartment. Over the years, there's been lots of speculation as to what happened here, but one theory is that he voluntarily disappeared and is alive, hopefully anyway, living with a new identity. At our number 5 spot, we have Amy. On Lick Road, just outside of Cincinnati, a terrible incident is said to have taken place. A woman named Amy lost her life at the hands of someone, but the perpetrator was never found. The prevailing theory is that her boyfriend did it though. As the years passed, tales of Amy's ghost haunting Lick Road began to spread, making the ghost of Amy one of the most prominent urban legends in Ohio. Supposedly, there are a couple ways to experience the ghost of Amy. One legend goes that if you flick your headlights onto the sign as you're turning on to Lick Road at night, you can see the name Amy briefly flash on the sign. Another goes that if you park your car at the cul-de-sac facing the woods, then flash your headlights 3 times, your windows will start to fog up with the word help being written in the condensation. Some nightly visitors have claimed to see the ghostly figure of Amy standing at the edge of the forest. Others claim to hear disembodied footsteps behind them as they make their way across the bridge. Next up we have Satan's Hollow. In Cincinnati there is a famous drainage tunnel, a tunnel with a very dark history. Strange and ominous things are said to have happened there. Satanic rituals and disappearances supposedly plague the tunnel, and one story goes that during one of these rituals, a portal to the underworld was accidentally opened. This has led to a number of locals believing this series of interconnected tunnels are actually a portal to hell itself now. People claim to hear strange noises coming from its depths and have even witnessed a shadowy figure known as the Shadow Man, a demonic entity who stalks the tunnel at night. The Werewolf of Defiance. So in the summer of 1972, the small town of Defiance, Ohio was rocked by a series of bizarre and terrifying encounters with what locals would describe as the Werewolf of Defiance. First reported sighting occurred when 2 railroad workers, Ted Davis and Tom Jones, were laboring on the Norfolk and Western Railway. Ted Davis, busy with his work, suddenly looked up to witness something completely unexplainable. A large wolf-like creature clutching a wooden board in its paws. The creature then just whacked Ted on the shoulder with the board before vanishing into the nearby bushes. I like the imagery of that. Just a werewolf come walking out. Bam! All right, goodbye. Anyway, 5 days later, Ted and Tom returned to work, hoping that the strange encounter was just a one-time event. But unfortunately, they spotted this pesky werewolf again. Luckily, it was much further away this time, and they just booked it out of there. They reported the incident to the local police, and before long, this wave of similar reports flooded in from various parts of Defiance. More and more residents claimed to have encountered a wolf man-like creature. People were scared to go outside. Like, nobody wants to be gored by a massive-sized wolf person. The sightings, did trail off, but the Wolfman of Defiance has remained a legend of Ohio ever since. In its second place, we have the Crosswick Monster. This incident took place in 1982. And has become a prominent tale in Ohio's cryptid folklore. According to this story, 2 young boys, Ed and Joe Lynch, encountered a terrifying creature in a field. They heard peculiar noises coming from the tall grass, and before they could react, a massive four-legged lizard-like beast emerged. The creature swiftly approached them, grabbing 13-year-old Ed in its jaws and began dragging him towards a hollowed-out tree. Fortunately, though, the boys' screams caught the attention of 3 nearby men who rushed in to help. They managed to rescue Ed, but he sustained some pretty severe injuries. In response to this initial attack, a group of 60 men armed themselves with axes and clubs, and I'm imagining torches, and they formed a posse to hunt down this creature. They managed to catch up with it, and at one point it stood up on its hind legs. The chase led them to a hill of rocks where the creature vanished into a hole, never to be seen again. The story was written up in the local paper at the time, and it's since grown to be a staple of Ohio's folklore. Just what the hell was the thing that they saw that day? And finally, at a #1 spot, we have the Circleville Rider. The Circleville letters case, which began in 1976 in Circleville, Ohio. Is it Circleville or Circleville? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, it's still one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries in the state. It all began with these anonymous, threatening letters sent to numerous residents. The letters contain detailed, personal information about the recipients' lives, leading to this fear and paranoia throughout the community. The mysterious writer knew intimate details about the victims' private lives and warned them to cease certain behaviors. One of the primary recipients, Mary Gillespie, was particularly targeted. The sender claimed she had been having an affair, which Mary insisted was not true, and the situation escalated when Mary's husband, Ron Gillespie, received a letter warning him that he would be unalived. The case took a tragic turn when Ron Gillespie was found dead in his crashed car. His death was ruled an accident, but many suspected foul play. The letters persisted even after Ron's death, leaving the town baffled about the identity of the sender. Several theories emerged, including suspicions about a local school superintendent and Mary's brother-in-law, but no conclusive evidence was ever found, leaving the case unsolved. This incident has inspired numerous legends and conspiracy theories. Stories have spread about the letters having been written by some sort of vengeful ghost or spirit haunting the town, even.
Coming in at #10 is Russell and Shirley Dermond, Georgia. In May 2014, elderly couple Russell and Shirley Dermond were expected to attend a party for the 2014 Kentucky Derby with their neighbors, who grew concerned when the couple did not show up. On May 6th, when the neighbors went into their house to check on them, the neighbor found the door unlocked and entered the house. Russell's decapitated body was found on the floor of his 2-car garage, lying in a small pool of blood. When police were unable to locate Shirley inside the house, they initially suspected that she had been kidnapped. 10 days later, Shirley's body was found by a fisherman on Lake Oceanee. An autopsy found that she died from either 2 or 3 deep wounds to the head from a blunt object. Now, Russell's head has never been found, and the case remains unsolved to this day. #9. Josh Maddox, Colorado. On May 8th, 2008, Josh Maddox left the house, telling his sister Kate that he was going out for a walk. He often went out hiking alone, so when his sister saw him at the house before he left, she thought little of it. But when he failed to return later that evening, his family became worried. On May 13th, 5 days after he disappeared, his father, Mike, called the police to report Josh missing. The authorities, friends, and family scoured the neighborhood and nearby Parkland area where Josh may have decided to go walking. After months of searching, nothing had been uncovered and hopes faded. Then, 7 years later, in August 2015, less than a mile away from Josh's home, property developer Chuck Murphy was demolishing an old wood cabin to make way for 32 new family homes. Now, the cabin had been used in years and the inside was damp and rotten. Work to demolish the chimney inside the cabin started, and to the surprise of the demolition team, crammed inside the brickwork was a mummified body, which was later confirmed as Josh's. His body was naked apart from a thin shirt, and his clothes were neatly stacked inside the cabin. Now, an autopsy found no evidence of any drugs in Josh's remains. He said, "The heart tissue showed no signs of trauma. There were no broken bones, no knife marks, there were no bullet holes. There is so far no answers to a number of things. It is very confusing. It was not an instant death." It seems like we might never know what happened to Josh that fateful day. #8. Dan Cooper, U.S. airspace. Now, one of the most famous heists in history occurred on November 24th, 1971, when a man who identified himself as Dan Cooper bought a one-way ticket to Seattle on Northwest Orient Airlines from Portland, Oregon. After the plane was airborne, Dan handed the flight attendant a note. Now, at first, she just put it in her pocket without looking at it, but then he told her, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a..." He then opened a briefcase to reveal red-colored sticks surrounded by an array of wires. He told the flight attendant to write down everything he was saying and then take it to the captain. The note said, "I want $200,000 by 5 p.m. in cash exclusively in $20 bills, put in a knapsack. I want 2 back parachutes and 2 front parachutes. When we land, I want a fuel truck ready to refuel. No funny stuff or I'll do the job." FBI agents assembled the ransom money and Seattle police obtained the parachutes from a local skydiving school. When Dan claimed his demands were met, he allowed all passengers and some of the crew to exit the airplane. He told the remaining crew to refuel the plane and chart a course for Mexico City while staying below 10,000 feet. Then somewhere between Seattle and Reno, he jumped from the plane with the money and was never seen again. Now, despite an expansive manhunt and over 45 years of searching, no conclusions have been made as to the man's identity or his fate after he jumped. Today, it is called one of the greatest cold cases in FBI and US history. Number 7. The Zodiac, California. The Zodiac took the lives of 5 known victims in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969. Now, he coined this name in a series of taunting letters and cards that he mailed to regional newspapers. Now, some of the letters included cryptograms or ciphers in which he claimed that he was collecting his victims as slaves for the afterlife. Now, he targeted young couples and a lone male cab driver. 2 of his wounded victims survived, and the Zodiac would attempt to end the lives of a couple on a hillside at Lake Berryessa, but only the woman would succumb to her injuries. The man would live to tell the story of what happened and give his creepy description of the hooded serial slayer. Now, the Zodiac claimed to have taken the lives of 37 victims and has been linked to several other cold cases, some in Southern California or outside the state. While many theories regarding the identity of the Zodiac have been suggested, the only suspect authorities ever publicly named was Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher who died in 1992. Number 6. Amber Hagerman, Texas. A young Amber Hagerman was riding her bicycle in a parking lot of an abandoned grocery store in Arlington, Texas on January 13, 1996 when she was kidnapped. A witness told police that he saw a man get out of a black pickup truck, grab her off the bicycle, and forced her into his truck as she kicked and screamed. Now, despite the massive search, she wasn't found, and then 4 days later, a man walking his dog found Amber's body in a creek about 4 miles from where she was abducted. Autopsy reports revealed that she had died of cut wounds to the neck. Now, as of January of last year, police have received and investigated more than 7,000 tips related to the case. "I miss her every day, and she's just so full of life, and I want to know why her? She was only a little girl," Amber's mother, Donna Williams, said last year. Now, police say there is limited evidence in the case, but they hope that the new DNA technologies can help them catch who was responsible. Now, her abduction led to the invention of Amber Alerts, and although some people might think they're annoying, they do save lives. Number 5. Tylenol poisoning, Illinois. On September 29, 1982, 7 people in the Chicago area ingested poisoned Tylenol pills, consequently collapsing and dying shortly after. Now, bottles of the popular pain and fever reliever were spiked with cyanide and returned to store shelves, targeting random people. After all the victims were buried on October 1st, 1982, it was revealed that the Tylenol bottles were intentionally poisoned. Immediately, over 31 million bottles of Tylenol were recalled by the manufacturer and were issued warnings. They also offered to replace recalled bottles with new bottles and offered a $100,000 reward to anyone who may have any information on the perpetrator. Now, these precautions cost the company over $100 million, and there were several more copycat deaths across the United States after the initial incident had occurred. Now, this led to the invention of the safety seals that you see on medicine bottles today, and to this day, no suspect has ever been charged or convicted of poisonings. Number 4. The Axeman, New Orleans. From 1918 to 1919, the Axeman of New Orleans ended the lives of 6 people and left 6 more severely injured. An Italian grocery store owner and his wife were the first victims. They were found in bed at home with their throats cut and skulls bashed in with an axe. The victims who followed were also found in bed, and no valuable belongings were taken. A newspaper received a letter with demands for the following Tuesday night that said, "I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home jazz band plays in full swing at the time I've just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of you people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe." Now on that Tuesday night, the streets of New Orleans filled with jazz and nobody was harmed. Then in October 1919, the deaths ended just as quickly as they had begun, and the criminal was never found. Number 3. Jeanette DePalmer, New Jersey. In 1972, in Springfield, New Jersey, a dog brought a decomposing forearm to its owner. They quickly alerted the police, and this prompted a police search, and a body was soon found on a cliff. The body was identified as Jeanette DePalmer, a girl who was missing for 6 weeks. Now, the hill where she was discovered was covered with occult symbols, and many were led to believe that her body was placed on a makeshift altar. Many locals and even some police officers pointed their fingers at an alleged coven of witches who were rumored to have used Jeanette for a human sacrifice, and others said it was a satanic group. Now, reports from local papers mentioned the police couldn't determine the cause of death due to the body's decomposition, and authorities investigated a local homeless man who was a prime suspect, only to find no connection to the crime. Many believe that Jeanette may have provoked a group of Satan-worshipping teens at her high school, since she was involved with a group that helped drug addicts find their faith in Christ. Now, to this day, her death remains unsolved. Number 2. Brooklyn Farthing, Kentucky. On June 21st, 2013, Brooklyn Farthing, her younger sister Paige, and cousin went to a field party. Paige and Brooklyn's cousin decided to leave the party early on, while Brooklyn had been plans to sleep over at a friend's house who was also at the party, so she was going to stay. However, when Brooklyn's friend decided she wanted to spend the night at a boy's house, the two argued and the friend left. Now, towards the end of the party, Brooklyn was seen leaving with 2 young men, and one of the men was dropped off, but the other man took Brooklyn to his house. It was at around 4 a.m. on June 22nd that Brooklyn called Paige and asked if their cousin could come pick her up. However, the cousin had had too many drinks and was in no condition to drive. Now, Brooklyn didn't want her mother to have to come get her, so she called her ex-boyfriend. He agreed to give her a ride home when he got off work. It was at this point that the man who brought Brooklyn to the house left. Now, before long, Brooklyn's ex-boyfriend received several texts from her saying, "Can you hurry, please hurry," and then "I'm scared." Then another text came in telling the ex to never mind and that Brooklyn was going to another party. He asked who she was going with, but there was no response, and Brooklyn hasn't been heard from or seen since. And coming in at number 1 is Tara Calico, New Mexico. On the morning of September 20th, 1988 in Bella, New Mexico, Tara Calico borrowed her mother's pink bike to go out for a ride. She planned to play tennis that afternoon and asked her mom to drive out after her in case she got a flat tire and didn't return home by noon. Now, she never did return, and no one knew what happened to her. Every lead went dead until about a year later, when a photo was found depicting a young woman, her age, and a missing boy, both gagged. The Polaroid photograph was found in a parking lot outside a junior food store in Florida. Michael Henley went missing in the same area as Tara in April of 1988 when he was hunting turkeys with his father. Now, they appear to be in the back of a van with a copy of a book written by V.C. Andrews, Tara's favorite author, lying right beside the girl. Now, initially, Tara's mother didn't think the girl was her, but the girl in the photograph had a scar identical to Tara's. In 1990, Michael Henley's body was found in Zuni Mountains where he was hunting, which strongly disconnected the theory that the two were abducted and taken to Florida, but unfortunately Tara's parents would eventually die, never finding out who took their daughter.
And we're starting off the list with the Anjikuni Village incident. This incident went down in November of 1930. Up in the northern wilds of Canada. A fur trapper was set to make a stop at the Anjikuni Inuit village to trade furs, but when he arrived, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The whole place was deserted, not a soul around. The trapper claimed that the food supplies were still there, but the people were gone. He went to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and they sent detachment to check things out. Their report backed up the trappers' story. The village was empty, and it seemed that the 2,000 Inuit residents had vanished without a trace. The villagers had left behind some strange things too. Sled dogs had been left behind to starve to death, and even rifles had been left behind. Things you just wouldn't abandon. The official line from the Mounties was that the Inuit probably just up and left due to some kind of panic or mass migration, but the sheer abruptness of it all makes for a pretty eerie mystery. I mean, like, why leave your gear and your dogs behind? At our number 9 spot is the Yuba County 5. This all went down in February of 1978 in California, and it's a pretty baffling story. So 5 men, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Ted Wire, and Gary Matthias set out for a college basketball game in a 68 Mercury Montego. Each had varying degrees of intellectual disability or psychiatric conditions. Now, after the game, they went missing. The car was later found stuck in the snow in the Plumas National Forest, but the guys were nowhere to be seen, and then months later, 4 of them turned up, dead in the wilderness. They died from exposure, and it seemed like they struggled to survive. They were found in an abandoned trailer with some clothing taken from another trailer nearby. But Gary Matthias was never found. No trace. It's like the guy just vanished into thin air. The whole case was obviously pretty strange. Why leave the car, and why head into the snowy woods in the first place? Nothing added up. The case remains a complete mystery to this day. And at number 8, we have the Flight 19 incident. So Flight 19 was a squadron of 5 US Navy Avenger torpedo bombers that disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle on December 5th, 1945, during routine training flight. So the squadron departed from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale in Florida on a navigation exercise known as Navigation Problem 1. The flight was led by experienced pilot Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor and was scheduled to fly eastward for a certain distance, then turn north and finally west back to base. Shortly into the exercise, Taylor reported that his compass was malfunctioning, leading him to believe that the squadron had flown off course. Flight 19 continued to fly in various directions, and the situation became increasingly challenging for both the pilots and ground control. As fuel levels started to drop, Taylor eventually instructed the pilots to ditch their aircraft in the ocean once they realized they could not find land. The last radio transmission from Flight 19 occurred around 6:20 p.m., indicating that the pilots were preparing to abandon their planes. No distress signals or emergency calls were received after that point. An even stranger flying boat was sent out in search of the missing pilots, and that aircraft went missing as well as all 13 crew on board. No wreckage or traces of Flight 19 or the search and rescue crew were ever found. Number 7, Roanoke Colony. In 1587, a group of about 115 settlers established the Roanoke Colony, led by John White. Soon after, White left the island to return to England for supplies and more assistance. He made it back to the island by 1590, expecting to be greeted by the settlers, but astonishingly, there was nobody there. The entire colony had seemingly vanished without a trace. There were no dead bodies and virtually no clues as to where they could have gone, aside from the words Croatoan carved into a post and Crow on a nearby tree. One theory suggests that the settlers may have relocated to Croatoan Island, now known as Hatteras Island, as indicated by the carvings. They also may have attempted to escape the island by sea and got lost. Another possibility is that they integrated with the native population. There have been numerous speculations over the centuries, but the fate of the Roanoke colony is one of American history's greatest mysteries to this day. Next up on the list, we have the Flannan Isles Lighthouse Incident. Lighthouses have a certain vibe about them, don't they? They've always been the perfect setting for a ghost tale. Well, this next lighthouse story is a real-life documented incident, one of the strangest cases of mysterious mass vanishings in history. On December 15th, 1900, a ship noticed that the Flannan Isles Lighthouse on the west coast of Scotland didn't seem to be operating. This information reached a relief vessel, which arrived on the 26th. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, the keepers, were nowhere to be found. The beds were unmade, the clock had stopped, and a set of outdoor oilskins were missing. The island's log revealed some strange entries in the days leading to their disappearance. On December 12th, Thomas Marshall noted severe winds, but nothing too out of the ordinary. But he mentioned that James Ducat, the second keeper, had been quiet, and Donald MacArthur, the third keeper, was crying. The relief keeper reported that the lighthouse's equipment and lamps were in working order. It was as if the keepers had simply vanished into thin air. And at number 5, we have the case of the Sodder family. In the rugged hills of West Virginia, the Sodder family lived a simple life. George and Jenny Sodder, 2 Italian immigrants, were building a life with their 9 children. But fate had a cruel twist in store for them on Christmas Eve of 1945. Fire erupted in the home. George and Jenny, along with 4 of their children, managed to escape the inferno. But where were the other 5? Days turned into weeks, and the Sodders clung to hope. They believed that they were still alive because there were no bodies to be found. The authorities were quick to chalk the tragedy up to an electrical mishap, claiming the fire started inside the house, but George and Jenny just weren't buying it. They knew the house had been recently rewired and inspected. George had been unafraid to voice his disdain for the fascist government of Italy at the time, and believed the fire may have had ties to the Sicilian mafia. He thought his outspokenness had drawn their attention. The vanishing of the MV Gioia crew. The MV Gioia was a merchant vessel, and on October 3rd of 1955, it left Samoa for the Tuvalu Islands. But when it failed to reach its destination, folks got worried. The trek was only supposed to take 48 hours. On November 10th, the Gioia was found adrift about 600 miles off course. The ship was in bad shape too. It was partially submerged, and there was no sign of the 25 people who should have been on board. Lifeboats were missing, and there were indications of a struggle, with bloodstains in a doctor's bag that had been tossed around. The Gioia was meant to stay afloat even if flooded, but it was almost underwater. But it didn't sink, and it was towed back to port. But nobody ever found the crew. No bodies, no survivors, no trace. The missing crew of the Mary Celeste. So it all started back in 1872 when the Mary Celeste set sail from New York, commanded by Captain Benjamin Briggs. On board were his wife, daughter, and 7 other crew members. Everything seemed normal as the ship sailed into the vast Atlantic Ocean. Fast forward to December 4th of that same year, a passing ship, the Dei Gratia, spotted the Mary Celeste, and something was off. The ship was just floating there, no crew in sight. They boarded the Celeste to take a look around, and not a soul on deck, not a person in the rigging. It was like they vanished into thin air. Complete silence on the open sea. The ship wasn't in shambles either. The cargo was intact, and there was no damage to the vessel. Almost everything was intact though. The only thing missing was a single lifeboat. But no signs of a struggle, no bloodstains, just an empty ship drifting in the vastness of the ocean. The ship's log offered no clues either. The last entry was like any other day at sea. No hints of trouble, no distress signals. It was as if the crew just decided to abandon the ship for no apparent reason. Number 2, Flight 370. On March 8th of 2014, a routine flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The night was dark, the skies clear, but little did anyone know this would be no normal flight. As the Boeing 777 soared over the South China Sea, communication suddenly went silent. The plane vanished from radar, leaving air traffic controllers in complete shock and confusion. The plane had seemingly gone off the grid without a trace. Search and rescue teams searched the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean, but the plane, along with 239 souls on board, seemed to have slipped into another dimension. The theory is that the incident was caused by mechanical failure, or, most likely, deliberate actions by the pilot. The aircraft had changed course and flew off the radar. No distress signal, no explanation. As months turned into years, there were only unanswered questions. Some said it was a hijacking, others claimed a government cover-up, but to this day, the mystery has never been solved. And finally, we have Bermeja. So we've talked about groups of people who have gone missing, flights that have gone missing, entire crews of ships, but how about an entire island just off the map? Bermeja was marked on maps, including those by the Mexican government, as a small island in the Gulf of Mexico. But when authorities tried to locate it in the 20th century, it seemed to have disappeared. In the 1920s and 30s, the Mexican government conducted maritime surveys, and Bermeja was part of the maps. Yet, when the government needed to confirm its coordinates for a maritime boundary agreement with the United States in the 70s, several expeditions were sent out to locate the island, but it was nowhere to be found. There are some interesting theories for this one, ranging from geological changes to cartographic errors. There's also a theory that it was intentionally removed or altered on maps for political reasons. But regardless, the fact remains that Bermeja, which had been marked on maps for centuries, seemingly vanished without any clear explanation.
At number 10 is the Axeman of New Orleans. In the annals of American crime, one chilling tale that sends shivers down your spine is the Axeman of New Orleans. This elusive and malevolent figure terrorized the city during a horrifying spree that left a trail of gruesome unaliving. The Axeman's modus of operandi was brutal as it was perplexing, breaking into homes, wielding an axe or razor, and butchering his victims. What's truly unsettling is that these unalivings don't appear to have any clear motive. The victims were predominantly Italian immigrants or Italian Americans, sparking theories of ethnic hatred. But the mystery deepens when some suggest that the Axeman may have just been a sadistic fiend who specifically targeted women. And here's where it gets truly bizarre. There's even a theory that he eliminated to promote jazz music. What? A letter attributed to the Axeman claimed that he'd spare anyone with a jazz band playing in their home on a specific night. Are you serious? And New Orleans heeded that call. Jazz echoed throughout the city, and that night no one fell victim to the Axeman's gruesome acts. What? To this day, the identity of the Axeman remains unsolved. At number 9 is the Cleveland Torso Unaliver. Active between 1935 and 1938, this unidentified serial killer left a trail of grisly unalivings in their wake. Officially, they claimed about a dozen victims, but there could be way more. What makes this case even more unsettling is the gruesome way the unaliver operated. They beheaded and often dismembered their victims, and sometimes even severed torsos and appendages. Most of the male victims were castrated. The cause of the unaliving in many cases was the horrific dismembering itself, meaning that the people were alive as it was happening. Oh lord. The victims were often drifters, folks who lived on the fringes of society during the Great Depression. Their identities were hard to establish, which was a common theme for this enigma. Forensic science in the era was far from what it is today, making it even more challenging to identify the victims, especially since the heads were often missing. But here's the twist. The Cleveland Torso Unaliver had the audacity to taunt law enforcement. They sent postcards and even placed remains where the authorities couldn't miss them, right in front of Elliot Ness's office. Ness, who was famous for taking on Al Capone and led the Untouchables, couldn't crack this case. To this day, the identity of the Cleveland Torso Unaliver remains a haunting mystery. If you're enjoying this video so far, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Most Amazing, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8 is the Zodiac Unaliver. This unidentified serial unaliver operated in the late 1960s, plunging Northern California into a state of fear and panic. What sets this case apart is its brazen nature as the unaliver's penchant for taunting the media and authorities. He struck in various locations, targeting young couples and even a lone cab driver. But here's the truly unsettling part. The Zodiac claimed to have unalived over 37 people, leaving a trail of cryptic letters, some containing still unsolved ciphers. Only one of these ciphers was cracked in 2020. It's a real-life puzzle that the world is desperately trying to solve. Though Arthur Lee Allen, a former teacher and convicted offender, was named as a suspect, the case remains unsolved. The Zodiac's eerie ability to vanish into obscurity has made it an eerie mystery, with investigations still open to this day. Will we ever unmask the infamous Zodiac? Only time will tell. At number 7 is Bible John, who operated in Glasgow back in 1968 and 69. But what's so baffling about this case, you ask? Well, it's the fact that this guy managed to off 3 people without ever getting caught. All of his victims were brunettes between the ages of 25 and 32. They all crossed paths with their sinister dance partner at the Barlow Land Ballroom, a place for fun and music that turned into a nightmarish crime scheme. But it didn't stop there, folks. This guy was called Bible John because he had a knack for quoting scripture and condemning adultery, especially when he was with his last victim. The police have never been able to pin down his identity, despite one of the most extensive manhunts in history. And what's even more mind-boggling is that some folks even thought Peter Taubin, another convicted serial unaliver, might be Bible John, but nope, he got eliminated as a suspect. and the mystery lingers on. At number 6 is the Freeway Phantom. The Freeway Phantom, a mysterious and deeply unsettling case, has baffled investigators for decades, which takes us on a chilling journey through the mysteries of American crime. This cold-blooded villain, harboring a seething rage against society, committed a series of heinous crimes that terrorized the Washington area. His motive is obscured in a shroud of darkness, which could be rooted in untreated psychological turmoil, perhaps depression, and definitely anger towards women. The Phantom's elusive persona, concealed behind a mask and a vehicle, suggests a methodical approach to his sinister deeds. His knowledge of the region's local stories hints at a connection to the area. The abduction and unaliving of his victims reveal a psychopathic disposition with deep-seated misogyny. The brutality of these crimes, coupled with a military-like precision, has led some to speculate about this person being a Vietnam veteran. At number 5 is the West Mesa unalivings. 11 women, their remains discovered in 2009, buried beneath a dusty New Mexico desert. It's one of those American mysteries that might never be completely unraveled. Originally, people thought it was the work of a serial unaliver, but there's a twist here. Actually, a possible connection to a trafficking ring. An anonymous tip pointed fingers at a suspect from Central America, but it doesn't stop there. Cops even suspected a trafficking ring operating through Texas, preying on people of the night during big events across the Southwest. This complex web of darkness stretches across various states, leaving us with more questions than answers. At number 4 is the Gileo Beach serial unalivings, a spine-tingling mystery that spans nearly 2 decades, casting a shadow over Long Island, New York. Between 1996 and 2011, the remains of 11 people were discovered, with the majority being workers of the night who had advertised their services on Craigslist. The grim saga began with the disappearance of Shannon Gilbert, leading to an intensive police search in the vicinity of Ocean Park near Gileo Oak Beach. In December 2010, the remains of the Gileo 4 were unearthed within a quarter mile of each other, only to be followed by the discovery of 6 more sets of remains in March and April of 2011. Now, the cause of the unaliving itself remains disputed, with police proposing accidental drowning, while an independent autopsy suggested possible strangulation. In a startling twist, the arrest of Rex Howerman in July of 2023 brought some closure to the case, as he was charged in connection with the unalivings of 3 of the Gileo 4 victims, and emerged as the prime suspect in the 4th victim's demise. Yet, the lingering mystery remains. Who else might be involved, and what other horrors lie concealed in the shadows of Gileo Beach? And number 3 is the Oakland County unaliver. Between 76 and 77, 4 young people disappeared without a trace. Their bodies were later discovered, each placed in plain sight along roadways in Oakland County. This gruesome puzzle remains one of America's most unsettling unsolved mysteries. Forensic advancements have shed light on potential suspects, but they've only deepened the enigma. DNA testing indirectly implicated 2 individuals, but the main perpetrator's identity remains hidden. One suspect passed away, and the other is serving a life sentence for unrelated crimes. Even with a DNA profile of the unaliver, no match has emerged. At number 2 is the Doodler. Alright, so let's dive into one of the most unsettling unsolved mysteries in American history. Straight out of California, the Doodler. This unsettling serial unaliver terrorized San Francisco between 74 and 75, committing 6 to 16 unalivings and 3 assaults. What makes this case more chilling is how the Doodler earned his name. See, before brutally impaling his victims, he would sketch them. The victims were all men, and the suspect targeted them after meeting at gay nightclubs, bars, and restaurants. The disturbing patterns of the victims being stabbed in similar locations adds another layer to the mystery. Despite police efforts, the Doodler was never caught. At number 1 is Charlie Chopoff. Now, if you think serial unalivings are the stuff of movies and TV shows, think again. Charlie Chopoff is an unidentified serial unaliver who terrorized the streets of Manhattan from 72 to 73. What makes this case even more unsettling was the gruesome nature of the crimes. See, Chopoff's signature move was you could probably guess or Google it. I wouldn't recommend it. Imagine the fear that gripped the city during those days. Despite a suspect, Erno Sato, confessing to one of the unalivings, he was deemed unfit for trial and sent back to a mental institution, leaving the case open and the mystery unsolved. The question remains, who was Charlie Chopoff? And will we ever uncover the truth behind these horrific crimes?
And we're starting things off with the triangular object. This is a piece of recent UFO footage, or UAP, I guess they're often referred to now. The clip was shared to TikTok and YouTube by TR3B. The footage was taken in the Isle of Wight in England. The camera person hurries outside and starts filming, obviously having seen the object before the camera started rolling. And when they point it up at the sky, we clearly see something. It's triangular with 3 bright glowing lights on each corner. It hovers in the sky, slowly rotating. According to the uploader, the object took off after the camera stopped rolling. It's definitely an intriguing piece of footage. I like how clear it is, but what do you all think? Was it just a drone, a hoax, or a genuine unidentified flying object? Let us know down below. And if you are enjoying this channel, if you're new here, why not hit that subscribe button? We got lots more coming your way. Number 9, the Nessie photos. The Loch Ness Monster's been talked about to death, and for a lot of folks it's almost become a bit of a joke at this point, but there was actually a considerable amount of Nessie activity this year. Back in August, a photographer by the name of Chai Kelly shared images of a serpentine-looking creature in the loch. She'd actually taken the pictures back in 2018, but hadn't shared them publicly until this year. Kelly and her husband had been having lunch at the Dord's Inn on the banks of the loch when they spotted something strange maneuvering through the water. It was about 200 meters off the shore, moving right to left at a steady clip. Kelly stated that at first she thought it may have been a pair of otters or a seal, but that it never came up for air. They never saw the thing's head, so that's pretty strange. Alright, we're not done with the Loch Ness Monster though. Like I said, lots of news about Nessie in 2023. Again, back in August, the Loch Ness Center, which I didn't know existed, and the Loch Ness Exploration Group, who I also didn't know were a thing, set out to conduct the largest hunt for the creature in over 50 years. Drones fitted with infrared cameras were flown over the loch, and hydrophones were used to detect any strange sounds from the murky depths. Hundreds of volunteers also watched from land, attempting to spot any unusual activity in the water. The Loch Ness general manager Paul Nixon talked about the big search, saying it was not just a PR stunt. He also stated that there had been some interesting findings presented to him recently, mostly from sonar contacts showing mysterious objects in the depths of the loch, one of which was, quote, the size of a transit van, which has yet to be explained. Next up on the list, we have the Orb, another piece of UAP footage, and not the last on the list. Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of alien talk on here, so be prepared for that. The footage was released by the AARO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which is an office within the US Secretary of Defense dedicated to unidentified flying objects, or UAPs. This clip is from about 8 months back during a Senate hearing. The video was recorded by an MQ-9 Reaper drone and shows what looks to be an orb flying through the air. It moves at a good clip, and it's very smooth too. The AARO has stated that they don't know what the object was, and that it is a genuine UAP, but they have seen others like it before. Pretty cool stuff. Once again, how do you all weigh in on this one? In at number 6, we have earthquake lights. On September 8th of 2023, a powerful earthquake of magnitude 6.8 struck Morocco. Several houses collapsed and other buildings were reported with structural damage. But where does the mystery part come in? Well, right before the chaos ensued, witnesses reported bright lights flashing in the sky. This isn't the first time lights like this have been reported though. This is a phenomenon known as earthquake lights, but experts still don't know exactly what causes them. So these lights, which appear as flashes or streaks in the sky, are thought to result from the Earth's crustal stress during tectonic plate movements. The theory is that rocks under immense pressure and friction release these electrical charges that then ionize in the air, creating the lights that we see. But again, that's just a theory, and while researchers have correlated these lights with seismic activity, not all earthquakes are accompanied by earthquake lights, and on rare occasions, they even occur independently. Next up on the list, we have the February UAP sightings. A lot of you probably remember this string of weird incidents, but for those who aren't familiar, the story here is that several mysterious high-altitude objects were shot down in February of 2023 over various airspaces. We had objects being spotted over Canada, United States, Latin America, China, and Eastern Europe. It started when several unidentified objects were shot down over Alaska, the Yukon, and Lake Huron. The general of NORAD, Glenn D. Van Herk, made a statement at the time saying the objects could be benign, but he wasn't 100% sure. And when asked if they could be of alien origin, he said he just wasn't ruling anything out. It really seems like the government and military, especially like over the course of this year, has just become more open about this stuff. The idea of extraterrestrial life existing, which is really interesting. Either way though, it seems like it's just being discussed more. It's not written off as total nonsense like it used to be more so in the past. Now, here's another interesting part about these cases. There were recovery attempts made. Unfortunately, the objects landed in areas that aren't all that accessible, so it may be pretty difficult to actually recover these objects, and until this point, we still don't know what they are, and I think the search has been given up entirely. But, I mean, you know, they could have found something and then just not said what it is, you know? There's always the chance that that's the case. And at number 4, we have the UAP landing. This piece of footage was apparently recorded in a rural area of Colombia. So we see this nice landscape view of the rainforest, we see trees, we hear birds, that's all normal, but oh wait, what's that in the sky? It's definitely not a bird or any living animal, at least that we know of. There's no wings flapping, first off. Plus, that would be a massive sized bird if it was one. No, it looks to be an object of some kind. You realize it's not actually flying towards the camera, but slowly descending. We watch as it disappears into the tree line. So what could this object be? I'm not a drone expert, so if you are, correct me if I'm wrong. But if that were a drone, it would have to be pretty big, right? The object is far off in the distance, but we see it pretty clearly. If it is a drone, it's definitely not some kid's toy. Now, this next piece of footage was taken years ago, but it wasn't actually shared online until about 5 months back by Reddit user CuriousAD5774. They said the footage was taken by a friend of their father's out in the country in Ontario. In the clip, we see the guy pointing the camera towards the night sky, where we see an object with glowing lights floating there. At first I thought it was maybe just a satellite, but the guy says the object is just hovering in place. Kind of hard to tell because he's not holding the camera very steadily. Now, looking at this footage, it's also easy to think, you know, what we're seeing is just a drone, but let me read what the Redditor wrote along with the clip. Don't got much to say about this video other than when my dad originally sent it to me, I felt like it had to be a UFO. And there's nothing else that seemed to explain it. Canada is notorious for sightings, and I myself have seen a few. This was taken way before drones were being used regularly. I'd say this video is easily 10 years old. At our number 2 spot, we have the Colorado Bigfoot. I don't think I was going to get through a whole list of weird, mysterious footage without bringing up Bigfoot at least once. 2023 was a pretty quiet year for Bigfoot sightings, at least ones captured on camera. But this next clip really made the rounds. It was being shared everywhere. It was all over the news. Even Stephen Colbert did a bit on it. So a couple were on a train passing through southern Colorado when they spotted something hiking across the hills in the distance. It looked to be a large furry biped. You hear a lot of people talking in the clip, obviously shocked and confused by what they're looking at. The creature walks across the grass and then kind of like just squats down, watching the train as it passes. Now, I gotta say, for all the supposed Sasquatch footage I've seen, and I've seen a lot, this one is not the most convincing. This could easily be a prankster in a costume, but you know what? I'm entertained by the whole thing. You know, it looks hot. He had to go out there in that big furry suit. He's in the middle of nowhere, you know? I don't know, I commend him. I think that's a commitment to a joke. Finally, though, we have the flying saucer. And I say flying saucer not just because I've exhausted pretty much every other way of saying UFO on this list, but also because this object really does look like your classic flying saucer. So the clip was taken by a pilot. They've already started filming before we actually see anything, so it looks as if they spotted something and then pulled their camera out hoping to see it again. Then they focus on one area of the sky, and we see this dot appear and then rapidly get larger, realizing that there's an object hurtling in the direction of the plane before whizzing by at an incredible speed. And slowing the clip down, the object clearly fits the description of that stereotypical alien spacecraft, the most commonly reported type. I really like this video because it's not often you see UFO footage taken in the air, you know, actually getting to see the object pretty close up, just whizzing by at the same vantage point. Could the clip be fake? For sure, but it could be genuine too. It's really hard to say with stuff like this because it's not illogical to think that there could be extraterrestrial life out there.